Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me as well, for everyone. And for having me back as well. It's the second time I'm speaking. So we'll be talking a little bit about technology from different perspectives over the next 2 days. I study technology. It's what I love, it's what I enjoy, it's what I've sort of built a company and organization around, my interest of and for technology. And today we'll talk about tech from 2 different perspectives. First we'll talk about future shock, what it means when everything is changing around you, what it means when you feel out of touch with today, because so many things are new. And then we'll talk a little bit about a couple of potential emerging technologies that are on the horizon, but we'll frame it in a way that you guys can do similar exercises about looking forward in terms of what's happening. I live in Sao Paulo. Big, messy, faraway city. I'm actually from Stockholm. This is not working. I'm actually from Stockholm, born and raised in Sweden, and I lived here in Amsterdam for a while. I know this beautiful city, and I do love being here, and it was no coincidence that I found myself having a few hours stopover at Schiphol late last year. It's always any excuse to come into town is worth it. And I lived in London for a while as well. And I can repeat the joke. No, it's true here as well, though. This joke doesn't really ring when you're in Amsterdam, because it probably rains more here than it does there. I'll flip the slides over next time. And I love tech. I'm interested in everything that is technological. And what you start noticing when you look into technology and when you research it is that not only does everything change all the time, but everything accelerates as it changes. There's a very profound truth to the fact that everything is accelerating. It's an important thing to keep in mind, because when you start thinking about technology as we see it today, it's very easy sort of projecting things forward in a linear fashion. It's very easy thinking that things will remain like they are today, but slightly different. That's not true. Things will forever be changing in an accelerating fashion. And wrapping your head around accelerating change is tricky, because our brains are not wired that way. One of the methods that we use to sort of shock this information into people is by literally being shocked about the things that are happening. We might have seen this picture a few weeks ago on Facebook and email. Do you remember this? It's a comparison between when John Paul II, I think, left office in 2005, and a few weeks ago when we have our Argentinian Pope. It's very representative. It makes for great Facebook pictures, very viral, but there's a profound truth to it. As Bear and Jan pointed out, there's exactly one person holding a cell phone in this picture. And he's probably not even taking a picture. Oh, 2? Where is the second? Where's Wally? There's the right one. There you go, yeah. Definitely not taking pictures. Here's Wally. There's a profound truth to this. There's a huge difference. It's not only superficial, especially because by the time this Pope dies, which will happen, or leave office for other reasons, the picture will not look the same. So by the next iteration, we won't see any screens. We'll be wearing them. That changes everything. Alvin Toffler called it future shock. If you like the theory, there's a book with the same name. It's from the 60s. Toffler, yeah. It's brilliant because it was written 50 years ago and it still rings true. The actual predictions have become irrelevant because they have become part of the truth. But the thinking behind it, and the theory goes like this. When you travel to a foreign country, to a foreign culture, you often feel culture shocked. Everything feels new, everything feels strange. You don't really know how to pick food at a restaurant, you don't really know how to navigate the airport. Everything seems very shocking, very stressful. What Toffler realized in the 60s was this is happening to ourselves where we live as well. It's no longer a foreign concept, that of being shocked. It's happening at home, it's happening in the office. Everything around us is shocking, is strange, is new, is weird. And going back to to the theory that everything's accelerating, this feeling of newness and of strangeness will not go away. So today, if you have the right $99 piece of equipment, you can see what the car mechanic could only see previously. You can look into your car. You can look under the hood with a Bluetooth device on your phone. That's interesting. That's been kickstarted, making plenty of money. But you can use the same phone to control your hand if you don't have one. And soon enough, your entire body. Exoskeletons are becoming a thing. People can't walk. Let's fix that. And let's control that with whatever devices we have. This is an actual exoskeleton that fixes paraplegics. It's still very beta, obviously. It looks straight out of a movie. But that's just the first iteration. This is second, third generation stuff. You see it in the subway. This is a 3D printed hand. These things are happening. All examples we'll talk about are real. There's no sci-fi, there's no theory, there are no concepts. You can fix hearing on your own if you have the right equipment. And if you're in the UK Army, you see through screens. There are soldiers trained to only look through devices which see reality in a different light, literally. And they spend the entire days like this for training. You can print guns at home. They work. Nobody's been killed yet. But that's a matter of time, because guns kill people, and what happens when we can't control where guns are sold, especially in countries like the UK and the Netherlands where they're strictly prohibited. Yes, but can you prohibit plastic? Or driverless planes becoming the norm as well. We see planes, I mean, it won't be long before we start seeing planes like these landing at Schiphol. There's no cockpit because we don't need one. You can see much more through a computer, through AI, being controlled from anywhere. Then you don't need a person sitting in the cockpit to fly it. The military usually shows the way of what happens in the rest of the world, and this is no exception. We're seeing drones everywhere. They're popping up. They're like wildfire. Every market, every industry is trying to figure out what to do with drones because they're the next big thing. And what happens when they start miniaturizing? What happens when they become tiny and invisible? When the quadcopters that we play around with in the park today, with remote control and Wi-Fi, what happens when they're invisible? When they just hover in the room, recording everything? Or why stop at drones? There are remote-controlled cockroaches. It's a cockroach with Bluetooth. What happens when we can email money? It's a mind-blowing concept. We're used to PayPal, but that's still a metaphor for real money. Google is just abandoning the metaphor. They're just focusing on the email part. They integrated money to Gmail, and now money is not even it's so far removed from the physical object that it once was that everything changes. Or what happens when anyone can train a robot? This is the Baxter. They want to be the iPod or the iPhone of robots. So it used to be that robots had to be programmed by people in white lab coats. Well, no longer. This robot sees what you're doing on the factory floor and repeats it. And it's something like $20K. It's super cheap for what it is. It's not something you want to put at home yet. Or grape picking robots. This is awesome. It recognizes the best grapes and just picks them up one by one. Set it free, let it loose. You'll have awesome robot wine. And what happens when you start building your own robots? It's becoming a market, it's becoming a thing. It's still very, beta. But people are doing their own robots. They're finding open source instructions on how to build the best hand, the best brain, the best Wi-Fi integration. All of these things are being open sourced and tested. That's becoming a market in its own right. Then you have this, of course. Why not? It's not terribly exciting, but it shows the way. It points. It's what? You can switch it off, yeah. Let's move on. What happens when everything is available at your fingertips? That's what Amazon did. They started with books, and they moved on to diapers, and hey, now everything is available anywhere. They just reinvented distribution. It's not a small difference. It's not a small change. They're not just an online retailer. They're redefining what it means to do distribution of physical goods. And as we'll see in a few minutes, that too is changing rapidly. What happens when everything is connected? All the cars, all the vehicles talk to each other. This is what Google's automated car sees. It's ingesting something like a gig per second in laser data, 3D data, street view data. This is a car that sees through the real world and is connected to the city, like the projects that I know you are developing. This is a fundamental part of the city, unless you live in Amsterdam. So what happens when the devices see what's happening in the real world, and they feed that information back to you at a gig or a terabyte per second? And what happens when the map doesn't match the territory? This is Apple Maps from about a year ago when it was still very buggy. Now it's just only a little bit buggy. This is how it sees. This is a poorly interpreted 3D data of a bridge. It looks like it's melting. And it looks funny because it's sort of real, but not entirely. And you can go all philosophical about it. But the interesting takeaway is this. This is from last week, somewhere in the US. I think. Chevron Renaissance, yeah. Somebody could probably find that hotel and find out where the sign was. Let me know when you do. Or this. Have you seen it? Have you seen this? This is the Buccaneer. It's a Kickstarted 3D printer. You'll never buy toys again. This is a $200 project. Look at the stuff it prints. It's unbelievable. It looks like a design object. It looks like a lamp. It looks like a toaster. It looks like anything but a 3D printer. Because then again, what does a 3D printer look like? We have no idea. We're just testing, just trying to figure it out. And you can produce some pretty interesting objects, some pretty interesting art, some pretty interesting ideas, all made on the fly, all downloaded, bought, stolen, doesn't matter. Build it at home, it works. This is the present. All of these things exist. There's no sci-fi in those slides. And what's interesting about the present is that this starts happening. We start doing away with legacy technologies. We start throwing away that which doesn't work, and rapidly accelerating towards a very strange future. My theory is that this is not a transition. The feeling of being in a transition will remain, but we're not moving towards a point B anymore. So at some point, it might have felt like this is the natural state between A and B, but that's not the case. There is no B. There is no endpoint. We're sitting in a perpetual transition, and that's fine because we have no choice. And technology is driving that, and it's not going to slow down. Barring nuclear meltdown, this will remain. So how do you prepare yourself for it? How do you think in terms of accelerating change? That's the idea we'll try discussing a little bit between today and tomorrow. And we'll flesh out 5 of these emerging techs right now. These are just 5 pretty arbitrary examples, really. You can pick any 5, 10, or 100 emerging technologies, and you will, in fact, after we're done with those. This is just a framework for how to think about how or which technologies will probably matter. The first one is hyperscreening. It's an easy one to explain. We all have this. We all have a phone of some variety or flavor. And most of us also have a computer at home and a television, a tablet, why not? Might have a laptop, might have an iPod or something equivalent, might have a computer at your office. The screens start adding up. They don't really go away. They just keep stacking up. You have more and more and more screens around us. And these are all sort of our personal screens. This doesn't even mention urban screens or screens that simply surround us in the environment. What happens when every surface becomes a screen? Well, the supermarket will look a lot more like this. You'll need ad block to go down the aisle. this is a test. It's almost a concept because it's too expensive to put screens on cereal boxes right now, but that's going to change. And when that changes, what happens then? We'll have advertising on Coke cans. Yeah, because at some point it becomes so cheap to print screens in aluminum or paper or cardboard for that matter, that the benefit outweighs the cost. So you'll sell more cans if they flash, and if they blink, and if they show promotions on them. It's going to happen at some point. It's happening in the UK. This is London. This is downtown. You have screens on the trash cans displaying contextually relevant information, which is very simple when you think about it. It just shows the tube stations that are nearby, if there are delays, headlines, etc. They're still very dumb. The screen doesn't show anything different to me than just to you, but that's the start. At least it's there. And we're moving towards 3D, transparent, universal, strange technologies with screens, where screens will sort of not only become invisible, but will become immersive, and they'll be everywhere. This is a concept for putting screens in the subway. And in schools, obviously. Microsoft has been doing a lot of interesting work, not good work, but interesting work with this. Here's a 27-inch tablet from Lenovo. It looks like a TV, and it's about as convenient as one as well. But they're testing it. We're building 4-inch screens, we're building 30-inch screens, we're testing out new grounds. We're seeing what works, what doesn't. Screens in restaurants, why not? It's very convenient. It's dehumanizing, but that's beside the point.
Why is it dehumanizing?
Because you need to talk to servers. You don't need to raise your hand, you don't need to ask for the check, you just press what you want. It's dehumanizing in the literal sense, as in you don't need to talk to humans, which is just a fact. I'm not against it. And the fact of the matter is that what the screens do is that they simply facilitate communication, commerce, education. They're a shorter distance between 2 points. And if they do that well, then there's no reason to go through people. That's why school is changing. That's why education is changing. That's why we're listening to music in a different way. I mean, everything goes through screens. So it's dehumanizing in a very important way. Thanks for mentioning it, in fact. And it's happening everywhere. Why shouldn't it? Why should we stop adding screens to society at some point? We shouldn't. Let's see what happens. Let's put screens everywhere. People are. There are natural market forces driving it. There are board games that only work with screens. So you buy the paper game, and it's augmented and it's improved if you have the right app with the right screen. They're flexible, bendable, transparent screens. We'll roll them up, we'll throw them away. We'll see them everywhere. This is the Tesla, a very kick-ass electric car, which instead of having a massive dashboard with buttons, has a 17-inch display with 3G. It receives software updates, by the way, your car, over the cellular network. It's like a computer. It's a computer on wheels, and you interface with the screen. And you have screens that move around, of course. Why shouldn't you? I was telling Barry and John just now, you have to buy these for things so I can show up without leaving home. They look silly. Yeah, you're Skyping into a robot. But it works. It gets a message across. And one thing is keynoting through a robot. That will take a while. But not if you're, say, if you work with factories around the world and you have to check in with your managers a couple of times a day. So Skype only does so much. If you can actually hunt them down on the factory floor or in their offices, regardless if they're in Bangalore or in Sao Paulo, it doesn't matter where you are. You remote in and find them, which of course creates a whole new culture. This is a concept, I think. It's the only non-product in here. But this isn't. This is a series of photos from Taiwan of screen culture. There's a dark side to screen culture, obviously. There's a new behavior around screen culture, which we're not entirely used to. We're still trying to figure out what happens when we have these ubiquitous screens. in fact, being connected in parallel to screens that's part of the new normal. That's why I'm looking around and see five or six people looking down at screens while I'm speaking, and that's good. That's probably a skill. In school, that looks like you're not paying attention, but I disagree. It's about adding information to the conversation. I wish I had a parallel stream of links that I could just send you while you're looking down at the screens to see what's happening here. That technology doesn't exist yet. But the notion of having parallel streams of complementary information is sort of what these people are trying to do. That's what they have in parallel. While you're eating, yeah, there's probably more relevant information around than there is in the food or in your baby. Perhaps not. Yeah, exactly. As she could be doing. Well, that's a DVD player, but yeah, as you could, exactly. You can connect to points on the map which were previously disconnected or too far away to be connected. Exactly. This is sci-fi, for now, out of Batman, and that's what we're moving towards. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. We're just moving towards a society where we have a ton of screens. How we deal with that, how we build for that, how we prepare for that is a whole different question. How do you build products, services? How do you build displays, if that's what you're getting into? It's a huge market that's happening. And it's one of those inevitable technologies. There is no reason to believe that this will slow down. It might reach a saturation point at some, a couple of decades down the line, but for now, if you bet on screens, you're betting on something safe. Which brings us to the next point of wearables. It's a biggie. Everybody's talking about what Apple will be putting out at the end of the year, or early next year, the iWatch, the iClock, the iTime, whatever they'll call it. It's one of those given technologies. And we'll have a look at how that's sort of evolving. The fuel ban came out about a year ago, June, July last year. It was a big deal, but it's already old. I don't see anyone wearing it anymore. Well, but it's in the minority. Yeah, but it's very telling. No, but it's very telling that it's in the minority, because all of these things, I've worn 2 Fitbits by now, and you wear them for a while, but as fashion statements, they don't work, because this has to happen before. They have to become more accessory-like than device-like. So this is the Misfit Shine. It's a $99 product. It does what the the Fuel Band and similar technologies do. It does what the Fitbit does, but much better. So what it does.
It's almost impossible. But to keep things simple, we developed a new type of wireless sync technology. All you have to do is place the Shine on your smartphone. The Shine synchronizes with your phone, communicating with the app, which is now available on the iOS App Store.
This is a $100 Kickstarted product, which tracks everything the Fuel Band tracks.
Wires, cables, or pairing. Simple.
But it sits in your pocket and looks like an accessory, and you wear it as jewelry. It's unbelievable, but it's coming out on the market soon. Oh, sorry, it tracks everything the Fuel Band does, or similar. It tracks your activity, your motion, walking upstairs, bicycles, cycling, and it looks like a coin. So that's the direction. That's why it matters. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not following, but why is it important if I go up the stairs or not?
Exercise?
Yeah, no, but for the device to track that.
Quantified self. So that's the whole notion of tracking what you do. That's the reason. The reason the Fitbit and the Nike Fuel Band became so popular is because they start quantifying your behavior. They start looking into the things you do. So if you feel healthy or unhealthy, that's beside the point. What it does is it tracks your behavior and tries correlating, positive. It starts correlating exercise with improvement, basically, and it starts looking into your physical life through the lens of a device. The reason the Fitbit and the Fuel Band are so awesome is because they do that passively. So you put it on your wrist, it sort of goes away. But what needs to happen is what tends to happen is that they become fashion statements in their own right. They become accessories. They become something you just wear, put on, without giving much thought to whether they're devices or not. The same way you'd have like 5 wristwatches at home, if you do that, you'd have like 5 different devices. They're all connected. They all talk to each other. It doesn't really matter which one you're wearing. Yes.
You said it also tracks your emotions.
No, that one doesn't. There's another one that does. That's coming right up.
What's it called?
This is the Misfit Shine. It's a really bad name. Yeah, Misfit is the name of the company, Shine is the name of the product. It's awful. But that too is beside the point because they'll be out of, they'll be out of the market in a year anyway. It's how these things go. So literally so the next example, this is the Pebble, another kickstarted, very clever smartwatch thingy. It already looks out of date. Exactly, and that's a good thing. That's part of accelerating change. So this was conceived probably like 3 years ago, right around when Kickstarter was coming out. Put on the market a few months ago, I think, and it's already it's not being panned, but it's not really being universally received either because it looks kind of outdated. That's because they didn't do this. This too is a real technology. This is a flexible OLED screen, I think, which looks much better than this. So whoever's doing the next Kickstarter for wearable watches will be moving in this direction. That's the takeaway. The takeaway isn't that Nike did something or Fitbit did something else. The takeaway is these devices are moving in a direction where they're becoming not only ubiquitous, but sort of built into our wardrobe in a way. In fact, let's do a show and tell moment. Like these headphones, this is a pair of LG headphones. It's like this is my first wearable computer. It sits here, and it just disappears into your clothing. And if you're not wearing a microphone like I am, it's very convenient. Sorry about that. So they sort of sit here, and you put on the headphones, at will. It's connects to Bluetooth to your iPad or whatever. It's the same principle, as in it's technology that sort of disappears into your clothing or your environment. So when you talk about screens, it's technology that disappears into the wallpaper in a way. When you talk about wearables, it's devices that disappear into your clothing. That difference is big, and there are clear signs that this is where we're moving. Or then you have things like the Myo, which is that band he's wearing around his arm tracks enough movement and enough intent out of the motion in your arm to become a user interface. Coming out this year, Myo, M-Y-O. It looks very sci-fi-ish, and what happens when you have that built into to your H&M bought shirts? Why not have that technology in every piece of clothing you own? Because at some point, the very high tech that goes into building that device, will cost a few cents. Will be built into all of your clothing. Anyway, they're moving on to other things here. This is the token technology if you're a futurist. You have to mention Google Glass, but we'll do it quickly. It's gone. This is the next step for Google Glass. This is when you have lenses with the same information that is being displayed on floating screens right now. This is a DARPA project where if you wear this contact lens, you're in the Army, and you wear the contact lens, it'll display information only for you. That's the next step. So, sorry? This one doesn't. This one does because it has a camera. This one only displays. So this part is the equivalent of this bit. So it's only the overlay. Sorry? It will, yeah, exactly. It's very tricky building a camera into your eye right now, but that's a matter of miniaturization, time, and money. So the direction is more interesting than the examples themselves. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of examples of that in popular sci-fi and culture. The third sort of massive technology trend is all about calm computing, which is, if you've ever owned a sat-nav or GPS device, you've seen this. After 6 p.m. or whatever, the display switches over to night mode. So it just assumes that it's dark outside and doesn't want to hurt your retinas. That's a dumb example of calm computing, which is a computer that sort of infers what's happening in real life and tries to change its behavior or interface or decision-making based on that information. It's a computer making decisions for you before you realize you need those decisions done. So what happens when every single device that you wear or that you have, that you own, knows where you are or knows where it is? So the device knows where it is, and it knows whether you're with it or not. You start embedding information. With that information, the devices can make better decisions. So we're used to the fact that we have sort of granular access to our location anywhere in the world. What's happening now is, of course, we're moving to indoor positioning, which means not only does my iPad, Mini 5.0 know that I'm standing in front of the screen, but it also knows who's standing around me because it has that information shared or whatever. It's very important grabbing that contextual data out of reality because computers can do a lot of clever things with that information. By knowing who you're with, where you are, what you're doing, it can actually make really, really clever decisions for you, which we'll see. Google is moving into this area, obviously. Google now is essentially an interpreter of what you're doing. It tries to infer your next steps in reality based on previous behavior and based on calendar information, based on your searches. So if you look up, I don't know if you've ever used Google now, it's very clever. If you look up like an address on your browser, then you pick up your phone a few minutes later, it tells you how long it's going to take to get to that address based on where you are, without you having to ask for that information. It just shows it. It might be relevant, it might not. After a few iterations, it'll know exactly when you're gonna leave home, and don't forget to brush your teeth. That's kind of information it's moving towards. It's thinking for us. Is that a good or a bad thing? Beside the point. It's happening. How do you react to it? How do you react accordingly? How do you plan for such a future? And how do you build products or cities, for that matter, which think like this? You might have seen the Nest. It's a thermostat built by ex-Apple engineers. Thermostats are pretty dumb. You tell them what temperature you need, and it just sits there, either pumping hot or cold air out. The Nest is a little bit smarter. It learns from your behavior. So you program it a couple of times, like it's cold outside, let's raise the heat. Or I just got home from the office, let's turn the heat down or whatever. After a couple of trainings, it sort of gets what you want because it also has a little bit of contextual information like weather and time. So it starts picking up on these signals, which perhaps you don't even notice, and it starts fixing the temperature of your house accordingly. And after a while, you stop thinking about it because it's just there. You never have to worry about the thermostat again because it's a calm computer. It fixes the problem before you realize there is one. Don't fight with it. You've seen 2001, right? Yeah. And we'll start building in sensors everywhere. Why not have a sensor in your oven or in your meat, for that matter? So what do you do with meat temperature information? I have no idea, but I'm sure somebody does. I'm sure somebody will figure out a really clever thing, to start correlating meat temperature with, I don't know, with circadian. Well, yeah, exactly. But when you start moving out, yeah, and it starts figuring out when you're going to have the barbecue because hey, it's sunny and your friends are in town. Let's throw on the barbecue for you, and send out an invitation to your friends. It's going to happen. It's giving contextual information, giving relevant information, making relevant decisions for you. It's an opt-in question, I think. It's, do you want those decisions being made for you? Will you sign up for those services? You always have the choice not to be part of it. That's the brilliant aspect of most of these technologies. They're rarely being decided top-down. It's mostly being decided bottom-up. We opt in to use Google Glass, and we opt in to use sensors in our beef, for now at least. This is awesome. This is coming out for the iPad later this year, I hope. It's called, there's so many names. I'll send you the link. This is an app that listens in. It does VoIP. And it listens into your conversation really cleverly. So it figures out, so if you're talking to someone through this app, it listens into your conversation and sort of parses the highlights. So whenever you're mentioning a city, a name, a person, an event, a link, it tracks it.
Does it actually do this on, not only on purely recognizing the words, but also the mood?
So to my understanding, it's just words. So it's only parsing voice for now. And it's doing so in a very active sense. So you have to use the application. You have to give it explicit permission to listen into conversation. You have to do it through the app. This was announced about a year ago. It's still not out on the market. But the idea behind it of having computers listening in passively is mind-blowing. It means that my iPad should know that I do not know the name of this service and should have sent you the link already. Because this information of what the service is called is embedded in the, somewhere else, which is not in my brain. So it should have sent that information to you guys. It hasn't yet because that technology doesn't exist. But the theory behind it makes sense. As in, why not parse what's going on in real life? Why not parse what I'm talking about and sort of send the relevant information where it belongs? Moving away from computers and moving into the body, we start looking at things like extending our senses, extending our bodies. It used to be that medicine did this. It basically fixed people. It brought everyone up to normal. And that worked. It's a good premise. What's happening in that space is interesting in its own right. This is a cochlear implant. It's a fashionable cochlear implant because it's pink. But it still looks very bulky. If you don't know cochlear implants, they basically restore hearing, not by amplification, but with neural signals. So it's not like a microphone with a speaker on it. Yes? I do. It's at the end of this chapter. So this is a cochlear implant, so if you haven't seen one, they're pretty mind-blowing. People are deaf if you take them off. So if you see people wearing them, like they're literally devices you stick onto your head, has a magnet inside. It requires surgery, and you need a device inside of your brain for now, but it restores hearing. It's artificial hearing through neural signals, which basically brings people up to speed if they're deaf. That's a start. That's what medicine has been really, really good at, over the last few centuries. The next step is, what happens when you start fixing people who are already at normal? How do you improve that? How do you enhance people? It's a very, very touchy subject, of course. But it's one that we'll start seeing on an elective basis very, very quickly. So we'll start opting into these sort of augmented technologies or augmented body technologies that are sort of easy to implement. This is one example, the Nekomimi brainwave cat ears. It's silly, but it shows the way. This is a toy. Came out about a year and a half ago. What it does, it listens into your brain with EEG, and basically figures out if you're paying attention or not. That's the kind of resolution you can get out of your brain with a $100 device. So if you're paying attention, the ears go up, and if you're not, the ears sort of fall down. It's very silly. I cannot imagine anyone here wearing them. Moving on. So what the company realized is, since cat ears are not a big market, but headphones are, why not take the same technology and put it into headphones and make that into a statement? So the headphones themselves don't have to communicate if you're paying attention or not, but the music you're listening to does. So it looks bulky, of course it does, but it tracks if you're in the mood, to listen to more exciting music, more relaxing music. It's still very low res, but it can sort of filter that information out of your brain and feed it back into a computer and make better decisions. It's kind of scary, not very. But if you can imagine the next generation of headphones sort of doing that passively, it doesn't have to ping, notify you, or have an LED on the screen to let you know. It's like Bluetooth devices like 10 years ago, which had like a flashing blue light. Remember that? It was useless. Well, we did away with that. And likewise with this. It looks very bulky, but 3 generations down the line, yeah, all headphones, like all expensive headphones, like Beats or whatnot, will sort of like listen in to your brain. And if you're paying attention, the music will go up and down accordingly. Or if it starts feeding from reality and figuring out what to do. Because headphones right now, as with most technologies, are pretty dumb. They don't really know what's happening outside of your head. Why not feed that information back? And why not adjust the music accordingly? Which in itself is becoming a market. There's another Kickstarter project with wearable headbands that then feeds into an API that lets any music app on your phone play the right music for your mood. It starts becoming a market in its own right very, very quickly. I'll send you the slides. Sorry, jet lagged. And here's the good news for blind people. See, right now we're looking at something like 4x4 pixel artificial retinas, which looks like this if you're looking at a person. But that moves up, and the resolution keeps increasing, and the colors keep increasing, and it gets to the point. It will get to a point where the artificial retina is as good as a real retina, and that's when we've gone from the, that's when we get people up to normal. What happens after that? What happens when you have elective retinal implants? At what point will a friend of yours who's not blind elect to, opt to buy a new retina at the Apple Store?
I'm interested in people where the visual nerve is actually decayed. So the retina is the connection to the brain.
Yes, and that is an entirely different subset of text, which I'm not listing here, but it's a good one nonetheless. I'll have a think through. That's actually probably a better example looking at the visual nerve damage than it is looking at retinal damage. You're right.
It's like the ear one that gives the neural information rather than
Precisely. Yeah, it's a closer parallel to the first example. You're right, to the cochlear implants. I'll update it. Thanks. So that sort of closes the chapter on opting in to upgrade your body. The fifth column, or the fifth sort of mega technology trend, still doesn't have a good name. It's called MatterNet for now, which is also the name of the company doing it. Here's the idea. It's a proof of concept, but it works. It looks really cool. I can imagine myself using it. So here's the idea. About a year and a half ago, Amazon bought up a company called Kiva Systems. Kiva Systems builds these orange little robot things you're seeing on the floor. What these robots do is they move shelves around a warehouse. So they optimize the movement of physical goods within a confined space, such as a distribution center. They facilitate the movement of objects on shelves. So, you have a shelf driving up to an operator who puts in the DVD you just bought and puts it on the shelf, and then the shelf drives over to another operator, which then puts in the books you bought, and then the shelf drives over to the FedEx guy, who then sends off the box to your home. Everything, the people don't have to hunt the stuff you've just bought at Amazon. That's automation on the factory floor, essentially. It's a very small step, but an important one nonetheless, because it gets the right it gets us to the right sort of frame of thinking, which is we used to think about distribution of goods in terms of essentially containers. We have a very solid network of distribution that happens internationally and transnationally and transcontinentally, essentially through containers. Containers are interesting. If you know the history of them, you'll realize how important they are to globalization. We could not have had the society we have today without containers. Okay, but they've done their job really, really, really well as a technology. But if you take the container thinking and apply it to smaller to a smaller scale and a more distributed scale, you'll start realizing that you don't need big, bulky containers on ships, but rather you can get away with this. Really smart quadcopters, drones, automated flying things that carry your goods around. So look at the intersection between the helicopters and the pizza and whatever Amazon is doing with Kiva Systems. It's an interesting intersection. It looks messy, but imagine having robots like these carrying not necessarily pizza around. Pizza is a proof of concept, but medicine, books, e-commerce, things you've bought, they don't have to be terribly strong, nor do they have to be terribly expensive or precise, because you can carry small enough objects around on a whim if you have the right network. Yes?
But they are so easy to hijack, so how would you secure them?
They fly high. By flying really high. Well, they have to go down at some point, and there is a resolution to it in the next. They are easy to hijack, so what you need is a centralized distribution system. So it's a decentralized distribution system, which I'll show like 2 slides up. The idea being the same thing the internet did for telephony, among other things, but essentially telephony is so we used to have these direct connections between people because that's how the wires were pulled essentially 100 years ago. The internet changed that, obviously. Everything goes through the network. All the signals go through the network. The same thing might happen or tends to happen with physical goods. So right now we have these very direct connections between nodes and poles in the world. So Singapore is heavily connected to Rotterdam, which is heavily connected to Shenzhen or whatever. It doesn't really have to be that way. So of course, to move around heavy objects that go in containers today, you still need a heavy infrastructure. But to move around things like books and medicine and DVDs, you don't really need to rely on TNT or the post office for that matter if there is a better infrastructure to do it. So the theory being, Matternet has the potential to do to distribution what the internet did to telephony. Yes?
Some of them can transport humans?
I'm sure they will. They're too weak right now. I mean, we're looking. So the best quadcopters that I can find on YouTube do like 30, 40 kilos. So they can transport a baby or 2. Yeah, there's plenty of babies. You're right. Yeah, 30 kilos. That's a lot of babies. It's like a whole daycare center. There's a company called Matternet. It's not quite the name of the technology yet. It's mostly the name of the company, but that's bound to change. Somebody will Wired will think of a clever name to call the technology at some point. We'll just call it that. What is Matternet doing? They're envisioning a future where you have these distribution centers where the goods fly through, because the quadcopters themselves they're not very strong, nor can they fly very far, but they're very cheap. So what you can have individual drones that do not fly straight from the Amazon deposit all the way to your home, but rather go through a network of distribution centers, which are either enclosed or on the top of buildings or something similar, where they can just fly the goods around in little enclosed boxes, as with the containers, but on a smaller scale, and flown around with these or something similar to these. It makes a lot of sense. It's very sci-fi-ish, but at the same time, yeah, why not? If the quadcopters are cheap enough, and if you have the distribution center in the right place, then this becomes a very plausible future. There's no reason for it not to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What about it?
Well, there's no reason for it not to happen. I mean.
Oh yeah, but regulation always comes afterwards.
Yeah,
It never precedes. It always.
comes up.
Yeah.
I think what Giselle is worried about is a bit the airspace. How do you, let's say, own airspace? And
Yeah. TNT will have figured it out, or the Post. Someone will. I agree that it's a massive question mark, as in how do you fix? How high can they fly? How far? But there are people thinking about it, and the fact of the matter is that the technology is so much more important than the existing implementation that the people will find a way. The Kickstarters or the VCs or the angel investors will find a way to fix that, because there's there is an implicit market force behind needing this, which is it's so much more convenient than shipping things in trucks. So those are the 5 key technologies. Again, they're an arbitrary selection. We could have talked about 100 or just 1. There is no finite list of emerging technologies. In fact, the exercise, as Bernd-Jan will explain in a minute, that we'll do today, is exactly that. It's looking at building blocks. We've selected 96 core technologies that they too are just arbitrarily selected, but they're categorized and they're in certain. They have a logic and a structure to them, which you can then use to build sort of new emerging techs. And Bernd-Jan will talk you through the exercise. in a minute. Thank you.